Welcome to this workshop on schools forums. Thanks so much for attending. My name is Patrick Grant and I work in Pre-16 funding policy implementation in the Education Skills Funding Agency in the Department for Education. So what is a schools forum? So a schools forum is a body that meets to discuss issues that relate to schools in all local authority areas, and regulations require that all local authorities have them and that they meet at least 4 times a year. Schools forums can be held in person or remotely, and the Schools Forum Operation and Good Practice Guide can be reached by link at the bottom of the slide. And the guidance contains a useful table highlighting LA and Schools Forum powers. So is there a minimum or maximum size for a Schools Forum, and who attends these meetings? So there is no minimum or maximum size, but local authorities will take various issues into account, including the need for full representation, schools, and the local authority's policy on representation for non-school members. So schools representatives should make up at least 2/3 of the schools forum membership, and they should be broadly representative of the pupil numbers in each category, and will include representation from all schools phases unless there are no maintained primary or secondary schools in the local authority area. 1/3 of the representation of schools forums can be non-school members, but must include a 16 to 19 year provider representation and early years provider representation from the private, voluntary and independent sector. So good practice, the administration of schools forums. Local authorities should publish all schools forums papers, including any reports or consultations, well in advance of the meetings and at least a week before the meeting. LAs should also ensure that websites are accessible and that previous minutes and future meeting dates are all published. And then, really importantly, an accurate minute of the meeting should be taken and published within 10 days, as this is a vital part of an effective operation of the forum, and it should include the clear recording of votes, and where discussion and opinions are contrary, that should also be recorded. So the National Funding Formula. National Funding Formula is the method that the government uses to decide how much money should be given to English state schools each year. We are moving towards a direct national funding formula, which refers to the end point of the process when all school budgets will be determined centrally. Local authorities are required to start moving towards the direct national funding formula, so that they are moving 10% close to this in 2023-24, and following this first year of transition, we will continue with the same approach to tightening in 2024-25. Schools forums are being consulted on this, and they will discuss this in meetings. As I say, with the advent of the direct national funding formula, some schools forums have asked about their future role, and the DFE will consult on this in the future, but we don't have timescales at the moment. So the national funding formula works separately to high needs funding. However, it may have implications for the funding of interventions at school level. So what are the main areas that schools forums consider? Local authorities will consult schools forums on changes to the scheme for financing schools. This includes surplus clawback mechanism. As I mentioned, changes to the national funding formula within tightening requirements. Proposed changes to the operation of the minimum funding guarantee. And arrangements for pupils with special educational needs in pupil referral units and in early years provision. And schools forums views will be sought by the department in relation to any disapplication request. Then local authorities will also bring designated school grant deficit recovery plans to schools forum. So schools forum's decision-making powers and voting. The regulations provide that a schools forum may determine its own voting procedures apart from voting on the funding formula is limited to school members, academies members, and private voluntary and independent representatives. Delegation is limited to the specific primary and secondary phase of maintained school members. Retaining funding statutory duties relating to maintained schools only is limited to the maintained primary, secondary, special, and PRU members. So do schools forums have decision-making powers? They do have decision-making powers on proposals that local authorities put to them on the following areas. As I mentioned, to delegate to maintain schools or pass back monies allocated to local authority through the funding formula for services the local authority would provide centrally to maintain schools, and only maintain primary and maintained schools representatives would decide for their own phase. Local authorities will also need to consult with the schools forum when creating a fund for significant pupil growth to ensure there are sufficient school places in the local authority area. This will be limited to support growth in pre-16 pupil numbers to meet basic need, support additional classes to meet the infant class size regulation, and to meet the revenue cost of new schools. And for the first time in 2024-2025, local authorities will be required to provide growth funding where a school or academy has agreed with the local authority to provide an extra class to meet basic need in the area, either as a bulge class or as an ongoing commitment. Then, for schools whose pupil numbers are falling, and if the school's surplus capacity is likely to be needed within the next 3 to 5 years because of a forecast rising pupil numbers, the forum should agree both the value of the fund and the criteria for allocation. Previously, support was only available for schools judged good or outstanding at the last Ofsted inspection. However, this criteria has now been removed. Schools forums agreeing other budgets centrally retained by the local authority, including for local authority statutory responsibilities. If they relate to maintained schools only, then voting is by primary, secondary, special, and PRU members of schools forum, and that's pupil referral unit. Then funding for central early years expenditure, which may include funding for checking eligibility of pupils for an early years place, the early years premium and or free school meals. With this, all representatives of the forum vote. Local authorities require schools forum approval in order to move up to 0.5% from the schools block to other blocks, and again, all representatives vote. Schools forum can agree movement for greater than 0.5%, but the local authority must seek Secretary of State approval via a disapplication. So what happens if the schools forum rejects the local authority's proposal? If the forum rejects the local authority's proposal, the local authority can appeal to the Secretary of State to disapply the schools and early years finance regulations through a process known as a disapplication. This involves the local authority submitting a disapplication form in which they should include the rationale for the proposal, the potential impact on other schools in the area, and the impact of other educational functions and services. But to clarify, disapplications are about applying a regulation but not creating new methods of funding. Education and Skills Funding Agency scrutiny. So the SFA is currently undertaking a scrutiny review of schools forums to ensure adherence to regulations. We scrutinise the meeting minutes and documents of the schools forum, including forum composition, voting on issues, and adherence to regulations. And I'm delighted to say that in general, where updated information was necessary, where we've gone out to ask for it and clarification, local authorities have been, when contacted, very cooperative in providing the necessary information requested. So thank you very much for that. So elections to the schools forum. Schools forum must elect a chair from amongst its membership. Elected members of the local authority or local authority officers cannot hold the office of chair. The relevant group, for instance, maintained secondary, decides how their school members are elected, and academy sponsors determine the process for electing academy members, and they choose which members will represent them. Finally, schools forum visits. So we also attend schools forum as part of the wider work we are doing to ensure meetings are being run effectively and feed into our group practice guidance. So ESFA attendees may answer questions that are put to them prior to the meeting. We like them any questions that we are going to be asked, we like them to be sort of submitted beforehand if we do, and we will take away questions and get the necessary information where we can to help people. We do not provide feedback following. We normally do not provide feedback following attendance of the schools forum, but we will highlight if there are any concerns that we have regarding regulation adherence and the operation of the schools forum meeting. Okay, thank you very much